In the grand halls of Valdoria's royal palace, where centuries of tradition echo through marble corridors, a single moment would shatter the foundation of the monarchy forever. What started as a routine morning would expose decades of carefully buried secrets, forcing a kingdom to confront the lies that had shaped their history. Prince William Alexander, heir to the Valdorian throne, never imagined that searching for a simple document in his stepmother's private chambers would lead him to discover the most devastating betrayal in royal history. Hidden beneath layers of silk scarves and jewelry boxes, he would find not just his late mother's precious sapphire ring, the one that had mysteriously disappeared after her tragic death, but evidence of a conspiracy so deep it would threaten everything he believed about his family, his crown, and his destiny. As his trembling fingers held the ring that should have been buried with Queen Isabella, William realized this wasn't just about stolen jewelry. This was about stolen truth, stolen justice, and a stepmother whose gentle facade had concealed the heart of a master manipulator. The discovery would force him to choose between protecting the monarchy he was born to serve and exposing the woman who had helped raise him, a woman whose actions had changed the course of Valdorian history. What follows is a story of power, betrayal, and the devastating cost of family secrets. In a kingdom where appearances matter more than truth, one prince's discovery would prove that even the most carefully constructed lies eventually crumble, and that justice, though delayed, cannot be denied forever. The morning sun cast long shadows through the towering windows of Valdoria's royal palace, as Prince William Alexander made his way through the East Wing's ornate corridors. At 28, he carried himself with the measured dignity expected of a crown prince, though those who knew him well could see the weight of recent responsibilities etched in the subtle lines around his green eyes. His father, King Edmund, had been increasingly delegating royal duties to him, preparing William for the throne that would one day be his. Today's task seemed simple enough. The Royal Historical Society had requested access to some of Queen Isabella's personal correspondence for their upcoming exhibition commemorating the 10th anniversary of her death. King Edmund, still grieving his first wife despite his remarriage to Queen Camilla, had asked William to retrieve the letters from Camilla's study, where many of Isabella's belongings had been stored after her passing. William paused before the mahogany doors of Queen Camilla's private chambers, a space he rarely entered uninvited. The room beyond served as both her personal study and a repository for various royal artifacts that didn't quite fit elsewhere in the palace's vast collection. He knocked gently, receiving no response. The queen was likely in the garden pavilion, attending her weekly meeting with the palace's head gardener, a routine she'd maintained for the past 8 years since becoming queen. Entering the study, William was immediately struck by how different this space felt from the rest of the palace. Where most royal rooms maintained a formal, museum-like quality, Camilla's study felt lived-in, personal. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with an eclectic mix of gardening manuals, historical biographies, and classic literature. A large oak desk dominated the center of the room, its surface covered with correspondence, garden sketches, and various charitable foundation documents that Camilla oversaw. William began his search methodically, checking the obvious places first. The desk drawers yielded nothing but Camilla's current projects and personal papers. He moved to a large armoire against the far wall, its carved doors depicting scenes from Valdorian folklore. Inside, he found several boxes labeled with dates and occasions, remnants of royal events and personal mementos accumulated over the years. The third box he examined bore a simple label, Isabella, Personal Items. William's heart tightened slightly as he opened it. Inside were carefully preserved items that had belonged to his mother, a silk scarf she'd worn to his graduation, a small leather journal from her last diplomatic trip, and several pieces of correspondence between Isabella and various international dignitaries. These were exactly what the Historical Society needed. As William lifted the journal to examine it more closely, his fingers caught on something wrapped in cloth at the bottom of the box. Curious, he set aside the other items and carefully unwrapped the mysterious object. The cloth fell away to reveal a velvet jewelry box, deep blue and bearing the royal crest. William's breath caught in his throat as recognition dawned. He knew this box intimately. As a child, he had watched his mother open it countless times. revealing the stunning sapphire ring that had been her most treasured piece of jewelry. The Valdorian Blue, as it was known, had been a gift from King Edmund on their engagement, featuring a magnificent Ceylon sapphire surrounded by diamonds set in platinum. It had been Isabella's constant companion, worn to every state function, every important family gathering, every moment that mattered in their lives together. William's hands trembled slightly as he opened the box. The ring lay nestled in its silk-lined compartment, the sapphire catching the morning light and throwing brilliant blue reflections across the walls. It was exactly as he remembered it, perfect and beautiful and completely impossible, because this ring was supposed to be buried with his mother. William sank into the nearby chair, his mind reeling as he tried to process what he was seeing. He remembered the funeral vividly, remembered watching as the casket was sealed with his mother's ring on her finger, as was royal tradition. He remembered his father's insistence that Isabella should be buried with her most precious possession, the symbol of their love and their marriage. Yet here it was, hidden in his stepmother's study, wrapped carefully and stored among other treasures as if it were simply another piece of royal jewelry. William forced himself to think logically, to consider reasonable explanations. Perhaps the ring had been removed before burial for some practical reason. Perhaps there had been security concerns. Or perhaps the family had decided at the last moment to preserve it for posterity. But even as these thoughts crossed his mind, he knew they didn't ring true. His father would never have made such a decision without telling him, and the royal protocol for funeral jewelry was clear and unwavering. Standing up on unsteady legs, William walked to the window, the jewelry box still clutched in his hands. The palace garden spread out below him, meticulously maintained and beautiful in the morning light. He could see Queen Camilla in the distance, speaking animatedly with the head gardener near the rose garden that had been one of her first projects as queen. She looked serene, content, completely at peace with the world around her. William tried to reconcile this image with the questions swirling through his mind. Camilla had been nothing but kind to him following his mother's death. She had never tried to replace Isabella in his heart, never pushed for a closer relationship than he was comfortable with. She had respected his grief, given him space to heal, and gradually become a steady, supportive presence in the royal family. The idea that she might have taken something so precious from his mother's grave seemed impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. The ring was here, in her possession, hidden away like a guilty secret. William returned to the armoire, this time examining the other boxes more carefully. Most contained exactly what their labels suggested: Christmas decorations from various years, formal gowns from state occasions, gifts from foreign dignitaries that hadn't quite warranted display in the main palace collections. But in the very back, behind several larger boxes, he found something that made his blood run cold. It was a small manila folder, unmarked except for a date written in pencil, the date of his mother's funeral. Inside were several documents that William initially couldn't make sense of. There were receipts from a jeweler in the capital city, correspondence with what appeared to be a private investigator, and most disturbing of all, a series of photographs. The photographs showed his mother's burial chamber in the royal mausoleum, but they had clearly been taken after the official funeral ceremony. In several shots, William could see that his mother's hands were visible, and they were bare. No ring. The Valdorian Blue was definitely not buried with Queen Isabella. William felt sick to his stomach as the implications began to sink in. Someone had arranged for the ring to be removed from his mother's body, either before or after burial, and those same someone had documented the theft with photographs. The correspondence with the private investigator suggested that this hadn't been a simple grave robbery, but a carefully planned operation. But why? The ring, while valuable, wasn't worth enough to justify such an elaborate scheme. Its true value lay in its sentimental and historical significance, not its monetary worth. Anyone involved in royal circles would know that stealing it would create far more risk than reward. William forced himself to read through the investigator's reports more carefully. Most of it was written in a kind of professional shorthand that he found difficult to follow, but certain phrases stood out clearly. Subject unaware of discovery, replacement arranged as discussed, and most chilling of all, client satisfied with transaction completion. This wasn't theft. This was a commission. Someone had paid to have the ring removed and replaced, and had paid enough to ensure the operation was carried out with professional precision. William looked again at the timestamps on the photographs. They had been taken 3 days after the funeral, which meant the ring had been buried with his mother initially, then removed in a secondary operation. The level of planning and coordination required for such a scheme was staggering. Someone would have needed access to the mausoleum, knowledge of royal burial procedures, and enough influence to arrange for the entire operation to be carried out in secret. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside brought William back to the present moment. He quickly but carefully returned all the documents to their folder and placed everything back in the armoire exactly as he had found it, except for the ring box, which he slipped into his jacket pocket. The weight of it felt enormous against his chest. Queen Camilla's voice drifted through the door as she spoke to someone in the hallway, probably one of her ladies-in-waiting. William quickly gathered the legitimate items he had come for, his mother's correspondence and journal, and arranged them in a neat stack on the desk. By the time Camilla entered her study, he appeared to be simply reviewing the documents with professional interest. "William, dear, I didn't expect to find you here," Camilla said with genuine surprise, though her smile was warm and welcoming as always. "I hope you found what you were looking for." "Yes, thank you," William replied, proud that his voice sounded normal despite the chaos in his thoughts. "Father asked me to collect some of Mother's correspondence for the Historical Society exhibition. I found several pieces that should work perfectly." Camilla nodded approvingly. "I'm so glad. I think it's wonderful that Isabella's legacy continues to inspire people. She was such a remarkable woman." Her expression grew slightly wistful. "I only wish I had had the chance to know her better. From everything I've heard, we would have been great friends." The sincerity in Camilla's voice made William's stomach clench. Either she was an incredibly skilled actress or she genuinely had no knowledge of what he had discovered in her study. But the evidence suggested otherwise, and William found himself studying her face for any signs of deception or guilt. "I'm sure you would have," he managed to say. "Mother always believed in the importance of strong relationships between the women of the royal family." They chatted for a few more minutes about the upcoming exhibition and various royal duties, but William found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on the conversation. The ring box felt like it was burning against his chest, and every kind word from Camilla felt like another layer of confusion and betrayal. Finally, he excused himself, citing a meeting with the palace's head of security that he couldn't postpone. Camilla wished him well and returned to her desk, completely unaware that her stepson had just discovered evidence that would change everything between them forever. Walking back through the palace corridors, William felt as though he were moving through a dream. The familiar surroundings suddenly felt strange and uncertain, as if the very foundation of his world had shifted beneath his feet. Servants and staff members greeted him with their usual respectful acknowledgments, but he barely registered their presence. Somewhat overtaken, in his private chambers, William locked the door and sat heavily in his favorite armchair, the one that faced the portrait of his mother that hung above the fireplace. Isabella smiled down at him from the painting, wearing the Valdorian blue on her finger, looking radiant and alive, and completely unaware of the mysteries that would surround her death. William opened the jewelry box again, studying the ring in the afternoon light that streamed through his windows. It was definitely authentic. He knew every facet of that sapphire, every detail of the setting. This wasn't a replica or a replacement. This was his mother's actual ring, the one that should have been resting with her for eternity. The questions multiplied in his mind like a hydra. Who had commissioned the removal of the ring? How had they gained access to the mausoleum? Why had the ring ended up in Camilla's possession? And perhaps most importantly, what else had been taken or manipulated in the aftermath of his mother's death? William realized that he was facing a choice that would define not only his relationship with his family, but potentially the future of the monarchy itself. He could return the ring to where he found it, pretend he had never seen the evidence, and allow the sleeping secrets to remain buried. Or he could dig deeper, follow the trail wherever it led, and risk uncovering truths that might destroy everything he had believed about his family and his heritage. As he sat in the growing shadows of evening, William Alexander, Crown Prince of Valdoria, made the decision that would change his life forever. He would find out the truth, no matter what the cost. His mother deserved nothing less than justice, even if that justice came 10 years too late. The ring caught the last rays of sunlight, its sapphire depths seeming to hold all the secrets of the past, and all the uncertainties of the future. William closed the box with a soft snap and began to plan his next move in what he now realized would be a very dangerous game. 3 days had passed since William's discovery, and sleep had become nearly impossible. He found himself staring at the ceiling of his bedroom each night, turning over every detail of what he had found, trying to piece together a puzzle that seemed to grow more complex with each passing hour. The ring sat locked in his personal safe, but its presence seemed to fill his entire suite of rooms, a constant reminder of the questions that demanded answers. During the day, William maintained his royal duties with practiced ease, attending meetings with Parliament representatives, reviewing charitable foundation proposals, and participating in the endless series of ceremonial events that comprised royal life. But underneath the surface, he was conducting his own investigation, using every resource at his disposal while being careful not to raise suspicions. His first step had been to research the private investigator mentioned in the documents he'd found. Marcus Rothwell operated a discreet security consulting firm that specialized in what he diplomatically termed sensitive recovery operations for wealthy clients. His company website was deliberately vague, but reading between the lines, it was clear that Rothwell's business involved retrieving items that clients felt were rightfully theirs, regardless of their current legal status. William had initially considered confronting Rothwell directly, but he quickly realized that such an approach would likely yield nothing useful and might alert others to his investigation. Instead, he decided to focus on the paper trail, using his access to royal records and his connections within the palace staff to build a clearer picture of what had happened in the days following his mother's funeral. The royal household maintained meticulous records of everything, from the cost of state dinners to the schedules of cleaning staff. If someone had gained unauthorized access to the mausoleum, there would be documentation somewhere in the vast bureaucratic machine that kept the monarchy functioning. William spent his evenings in the royal archives, ostensibly researching family history for a speech he was scheduled to give, but actually combing through security logs, maintenance records, and staff schedules from the period immediately following his mother's death. What he found was disturbing in its ordinariness. The mausoleum had been cleaned 3 days after the funeral, exactly as documented in the photographs he'd discovered. The cleaning had been performed by a crew that included 2 staff members who were not regular palace employees, temporary workers brought in specifically for the task. The supervisor who had authorized their hiring was Margaret Fitzwell, who at the time served as Queen Camilla's personal secretary. Margaret had left royal service 2 years later to move abroad with her husband, officially to pursue opportunities in international diplomatic circles. She now lived in Switzerland and had not returned to Valdoria since her departure. The coincidences were beginning to feel less coincidental. William's investigation took on new urgency when he realized that his father had begun making subtle comments about his eventual engagement and marriage. King Edmund had always been patient about William's bachelor status, understanding that the crown prince needed time to find the right partner for both personal happiness and royal duties. But lately, there had been hints that the king's patience was not unlimited, and that he expected William to begin seriously considering his future queen. The prospect of marriage had always been complicated for William, not because he didn't want a family, but because he was acutely aware of the ways that royal marriages could be manipulated for political advantage. His mother's marriage to his father had been a love match, but it had also been carefully orchestrated by various royal advisors and family members who saw political benefits in the union. Now, with questions swirling around his mother's death and his stepmother's possible involvement in some kind of conspiracy, the idea of bringing another person into the royal family felt fraught with danger. These thoughts were weighing heavily on William's mind when he received an unexpected visitor. Lady Catherine Stirling, the daughter of Earl Stirling and a longtime family friend, had returned to Valdoria after completing her graduate studies in international law at Cambridge. Catherine had grown up in royal circles, and she and William had maintained a friendship since childhood that had always teetered on the edge of something more romantic. Catherine arrived at the palace for what was officially a social call, but William suspected that her visit had been encouraged, if not arranged, by various family members who saw her as an ideal candidate for crown princess. She was beautiful, intelligent, well-educated, and perhaps most importantly, she understood the unique pressures and responsibilities of royal life. They met in the palace's informal sitting room, a space that felt more like a comfortable library than a formal receiving area. Catherine looked radiant in a simple blue dress that complemented her dark hair and bright eyes. She had always possessed an easy confidence that William found attractive, and today was no exception. "It's wonderful to see you again," Catherine said warmly as they settled into armchairs near the fireplace. "I've been following your work with the Youth Education Initiative in the papers. It sounds like you're making a real difference." William smiled, grateful for the distraction from his darker thoughts. "Thank you. It's been rewarding to see how much the young people respond when they're given real opportunities. I think we underestimate their potential too often." They spent the next hour catching up on Catherine's time at Cambridge, her thesis on international trade law, and her plans for the future. She spoke with passion about her desire to work in diplomatic circles, possibly with one of the international organizations based in Geneva. Her intelligence and ambition were obvious, but so was her awareness that her future might take different directions, depending on various factors that remained unspoken between them. As their conversation continued, William found himself studying Catherine with new eyes. She would make an excellent queen, he realized. She was smart enough to handle the intellectual demands of the role, poised enough to manage the public aspects, and diplomatic enough to navigate the complex relationships that defined royal life. More than that, she genuinely cared about the same social causes that mattered to him. But could he trust her with the truth about what he had discovered? And, more importantly, would marrying her protect her from whatever conspiracy had surrounded his mother's death? Or would it simply make her another target? "William, you seem distracted," Catherine observed gently. "Is everything all right? I know the pressures of your position have been increasing as your father prepares you for more responsibility." Her perceptiveness shouldn't have surprised him. Catherine had always been remarkably good at reading people, but it caught him off guard nonetheless. For a moment, he considered telling her everything, laying out the evidence he had found and asking for her legal expertise in interpreting what it might mean. The urge to share the burden of his knowledge was almost overwhelming. Instead, he chose a different approach. "Catherine, what do you know about my mother's death? I mean, beyond the official accounts." Catherine looked surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "Queen Isabella died in the automobile accident 10 years ago. It was a terrible tragedy, but I thought the investigations were quite thorough." "They were," William agreed, "but sometimes I wonder if there were aspects of the situation that weren't fully explored. Political implications, personal relationships, things that might have been considered too sensitive for public discussion." Catherine leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more serious. "Are you asking this as a son who's still grieving, or as a future king who's beginning to understand the complexities of royal politics?" The question was shrewd and went to the heart of William's internal conflict. "Both, I suppose. I've been thinking lately about how much of our family history might be incomplete, how many stories we accept without really examining the evidence." "That's a dangerous way of thinking for someone in your position," Catherine said carefully. "But it's also probably necessary. The monarchy survives partly because people believe in the official narratives, but it can only maintain legitimacy if those narratives are essentially truthful." William studied her face as she spoke. Catherine understood the delicate balance between public mythology and private reality that defined royal existence. She also understood that sometimes the truth could be more damaging to the institution than carefully managed secrets. "If you discovered evidence that challenged an accepted story about our family," William asked slowly, "what would you do with that information?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment, clearly considering the implications of the question. "I suppose it would depend on what kind of evidence it was and what kind of story it challenged. Some secrets protect people who are still alive, others protect institutions that serve important purposes. But some secrets just protect lies that should never have been told in the first place. And how would you tell the difference?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Catherine replied. "I think you'd have to look at who benefits from the secret being kept and who is harmed by it. You'd have to consider whether revealing the truth would serve justice or just cause unnecessary pain. And you'd have to be very sure that you had the full truth, not just fragments that might be misinterpreted." William nodded, impressed by her thoughtful response. Catherine possessed exactly the kind of analytical mind that would be valuable in parsing the complexities of what he had discovered. but he also realized that involving her would fundamentally change the nature of their relationship and potentially put her in danger. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of afternoon tea, brought by one of the palace staff members. As they sipped tea and shared small cakes, the conversation turned to lighter topics, but William's mind continued to work through the implications of everything Catherine had said. After Catherine left, promising to attend the charity gala scheduled for the following weekend, William returned to his chambers and retrieved the documents from his safe. He spread them across his desk and began to examine them with new eyes, trying to apply Catherine's framework for evaluating secrets and their purposes. Who benefited from the theft of his mother's ring? The obvious answer was Queen Camilla, assuming she had commissioned its removal. But why would she want it? The ring had tremendous sentimental value for William and his father, but its monetary value, while significant, wasn't extraordinary by royal standards. Camilla had access to the royal jewelry collection and could wear pieces that were far more valuable and historically significant, unless the value wasn't financial or even sentimental. Unless the ring itself contained something else, something that made its possession critically important to someone. William examined the ring again, this time with a magnifying glass from his desk drawer. The setting appeared to be exactly as he remembered it, but he realized he had never looked closely at the underside of the piece. Turning it over, he found something that made his heart race. A small, almost invisible seam in the metal that suggested the setting might be designed to open. With careful pressure applied to a nearly invisible catch, a tiny compartment in the ring's setting sprang open. Inside was a small piece of paper, rolled so tightly it was barely larger than a grain of rice. William's hand shook as he carefully extracted and unrolled it. Written in his mother's distinctive handwriting was a single line: "The truth about Edward's death is hidden in the music box. Trust no one in the inner circle." William stared at the message in shock. Edward had been his older brother, the original heir to the throne, who had died in a riding accident when William was just 5 years old. Edward's death had been a terrible tragedy that had reshaped the entire royal succession, making William the crown prince instead of the second son he had been born to be. The official investigation into Edward's death had concluded that it was a tragic accident caused by his horse being startled by a snake in the trail. Edward had been thrown and struck his head on a rock, dying instantly. The findings had been accepted without question, and the royal family had grieved and moved forward as best they could. But according to this hidden message, Queen Isabella had believed there was more to the story, and apparently, she had evidence hidden in a music box somewhere in the palace. William's mind raced as he tried to remember anything about a music box that might have belonged to his mother. There had been several in her chambers, small decorative pieces that played various melodies when wound. After her death, most of her personal belongings had been distributed among family members or stored in the royal archives. William realized he would need to track down every music box that had been in his mother's possession to find the one containing whatever evidence she had hidden. But first, he needed to understand why his mother had felt the need to hide this information, and why she had believed that no one in the inner circle could be trusted. The inner circle of royal advisors included the same people who were still guiding the monarchy today, including several who had been instrumental in arranging his father's marriage to Queen Camilla. The implications were staggering. If his mother had discovered evidence of foul play in Edward's death, and if she had been silenced before she could reveal it, then William might be the only person who could finally bring the truth to light. But doing so would require him to challenge not just his stepmother, but potentially the entire power structure that surrounded the throne. As night fell over the palace, William sat in the darkness of his study, the ring and its secret message before him on the desk. Outside his windows, the palace grounds were peaceful and secure, patrolled by guards who had sworn to protect the royal family with their lives. But inside these walls, William was beginning to realize the greatest threats to the monarchy might come not from external enemies, but from the very people entrusted to preserve and protect it. The hunt for his mother's music box would begin tomorrow. Tonight he would plan his strategy and prepare for what might be the most important investigation of his life. Somewhere in the vast palace, evidence waited that could reshape everything he understood about his family's history. All he had to do was find it, before anyone else realized what he was looking for. The ring caught the moonlight streaming through his window, its sapphire depths seeming to hold all the secrets of the past and all the promises of justice delayed but not denied. William closed his hand around it and made a silent promise to his mother's memory. Whatever the truth was, wherever it led, he would find it and ensure that it finally came to light. William's search for his mother's music box began at dawn the following day. He started with the most obvious location, the Royal Archives, housed in the palace's north wing in a series of climate-controlled rooms that preserved centuries of royal artifacts. The archives were managed by Dr. Peredio, Eleanor Morrison, a meticulous historian who had served the royal family for over 20 years and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of every item in the collection. Your Highness, Dr. Palatal. Morrison greeted him warmly when he appeared at her office door. What an unexpected pleasure. How may I assist you today? William had prepared a plausible cover story. I'm researching items that belong to my mother for a potential memorial exhibition next year. I'm particularly interested in her personal belongings, things that would help people understand her as a person rather than just as a queen. Morrison's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. What a wonderful project. Queen Isabella had such exquisite taste, and many of her personal items do tell beautiful stories about her interests and personality. She consulted her computer system. Let me see what we have catalogued from her personal effects. As Dr. Morrison searched through digital records, William tried to appear casually interested while his heart hammered against his chest. Everything depended on whether the music box he needed was here in the archives, or whether it had been distributed elsewhere after his mother's death. Here we are, Dr. All, Morrison announced. We have quite a collection of Queen Isabella's personal items. Several pieces of jewelry, some books from her private library, artwork from her travels, and yes, she paused, scrolling through the list. 3 music boxes, 2 smaller ones, and 1 larger decorative piece that was apparently quite special to her. May I see them? William asked, working to keep his voice steady. Morrison led him through a series of secured doors into the main archive storage area. The space was vast and eerily quiet, filled with rows of shelves and climate-controlled display cases, containing treasures spanning centuries of Valdorian history. Near the back of the room, Dr. Morrison stopped at a section labeled with his mother's name and began carefully removing items from their protective storage. The first music box was small and delicate, made of silver with intricate engravings of roses around its base. When wound, it played a gentle waltz that William vaguely remembered from his childhood. But when he examined it closely, he found no hidden compartments or anything that might contain the evidence his mother had referenced. The second was slightly larger, crafted from dark wood with mother-of-pearl inlays that formed intricate patterns across its surface. This one played a more complex melody, something classical that William didn't recognize. Again, his careful examination revealed nothing unusual. The third music box, however, was extraordinary. Made of rosewood with gold fittings, it was roughly the size of a jewelry box, but far more elaborate. The top was decorated with a detailed miniature garden scene, complete with tiny figures of a man and woman dancing among sculpted flowers. When Dr. Morrison wound the mechanism, it played a hauntingly beautiful melody that William immediately recognized as his mother's favorite piece of music. This one was apparently very special to Queen Isabella, Dr. Morrison explained. According to the notes in our files, it was a gift from King Edmund early in their marriage, and she kept it on her dressing table throughout her life. William's hands trembled slightly as he lifted the music box to examine it more closely. Unlike the others, this one showed signs of frequent handling, tiny scratches on the base, slight wear on the winding mechanism, places where loving fingers had touched it countless times. If his mother had hidden evidence anywhere, it would be in this beautiful, beloved object. Dr. Morrison, William said carefully, would it be possible for me to borrow this for a few days? I'd like to include it in some photographs for the exhibition, and I think having it in my chambers might help me remember more stories about my mother that would be appropriate for public sharing. Dr. Morrison hesitated. Archive protocol strictly prohibited removing items from the secure storage area, but denying a direct request from the Crown Prince would be unprecedented. After a moment's consideration, she nodded. Of course, Your Highness. I'll prepare the proper documentation. Please do take special care with it. It's irreplaceable." William assured her that he understood the precious nature of the piece, and within an hour he was back in his private chambers with the music box secured in a protective carrying case. He dismissed his personal staff for the remainder of the day, claiming he needed privacy to work on correspondence, and settled down to examine his mother's treasure in detail. The music box was more complex than it had first appeared. The dancing figures on the top could be moved slightly, and the flowers in the miniature garden seemed to be individual pieces rather than carved from a single block of wood. William spent the better part of an hour carefully exploring every detail, looking for hidden springs, secret panels, or anything that might reveal a concealed compartment. His breakthrough came when he noticed that one of the tiny flowers in the garden scene was a different shade of gold than the others. When he pressed it gently, he felt it give slightly under the pressure. A soft click indicated that some internal mechanism had engaged, and suddenly a section of the music box's base slid away to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside the compartment were several items that made William's breath catch in his throat. There were photographs, clear, well-lit images that showed his brother Edward's body at the scene of his riding accident. But these photos revealed details that had never been included in any official report. Edward's injuries were clearly visible, and they suggested a very different story than the one the family had been told. In the official account, Edward had been thrown from his horse and struck his head on a rock, causing fatal injuries consistent with an accidental fall. But the photographs showed injuries to Edward's back and ribs that appeared to be consistent with being struck by something heavy and blunt before he ever hit the ground. Moreover, the positioning of the body and the horse suggested that Edward had dismounted voluntarily rather than being thrown. Along with the photographs was a handwritten letter in Queen Isabella's careful script, dated just 2 weeks before her own death. William's hands shook as he read. "My dearest William, if you are reading this, then my fears about our family's safety have proven justified. I pray that you will never need to see these words. But I cannot leave this world without ensuring that the truth about your brother's death is preserved somewhere beyond the reach of those who would see it buried forever." Edward discovered something in the days before his death, something about the financial arrangements surrounding several royal foundations and charitable organizations. He came to me with concerns that millions of pounds were being diverted from their intended purposes and funneled into private accounts controlled by members of the inner circle. He had documentation, financial records that he had copied from secure files, and he was preparing to present his findings to your father. I believe Edward was murdered to prevent this information from coming to light. The scene of his accident was carefully staged, but whoever arranged it did not account for the fact that I would demand to see his body before burial, or that I would bring a camera to document inconsistencies in the official story. In the week following Edward's funeral, I began my own investigation into the financial irregularities he had discovered. What I found was more extensive and more carefully concealed than even Edward had realized. The corruption involves not just the diversion of charitable funds, but the manipulation of royal investments, the sale of artifacts from the royal collection, and the creation of false documents to cover the paper trail. I have hidden Edward's original financial documents in a safety deposit box in the Capital National Bank under the name Elizabeth Hartwell, my mother's maiden name. The key is sewn into the lining of my jewelry case, the black velvet one with the silver clasps that was my grandmother's. The box number is 1247. I fear that my investigation has not gone unnoticed. Strange things have been happening. Items moved in my private chambers. Conversations overheard that I know I had in confidence. Meetings canceled at the last minute, without explanation. I suspect that someone close to the family is monitoring my activities and reporting back to those involved in the conspiracy. If something happens to me, please know that it was not an accident, no matter how it may appear. The people responsible for Edward's death will not hesitate to silence anyone else who threatens to expose their crimes. Trust no one in the inner circle until you know for certain where their loyalties lie. This includes Camilla, though I pray that my suspicions about her involvement are wrong. She came into our family at a very convenient time for those who needed to rebuild their power structure after Edward's death disrupted their plans. The safety deposit box contains everything: Edward's financial evidence, my own research, and documentation of the threats we both received in our final weeks. Use this information wisely. My darling boy. The monarchy can survive the truth, but it cannot survive the corruption that has infected it. I love you more than words can express, and I have faith that you will know what to do when the time comes to act. Your devoted mother Isabella, William, read the letter 3 times before the full implications sank in. His mother hadn't just suspected that Edward was murdered, she had evidence, and she had been killed for the same reason, silenced before she could expose a conspiracy that apparently reached into the highest levels of royal governance. The reference to Queen Camilla sent chills down William's spine. His mother's suspicions about his stepmother's involvement suggested that Camilla's marriage to King Edmund might not have been the romantic second chance it appeared to be, but rather a strategic move to place a conspirator in the perfect position to monitor and control the royal family. William forced himself to think logically about what he needed to do next. The safety deposit box his mother had referenced would contain the detailed evidence he needed to understand the full scope of the conspiracy and identify everyone involved. But accessing it would require him to retrieve the key from his mother's jewelry case, which had been given to Queen Camilla after Isabella's death as part of the normal distribution of personal effects among family members. The jewelry case now sat in Camilla's private chambers, probably containing secrets that could bring down everyone involved in his mother's murder. Getting access to it without raising suspicions would require careful planning and considerable risk. But first, William needed to understand more about the current state of the royal finances, and whether the corruption his mother had discovered was still ongoing. If the conspirators were still active, then exposing them would be more than just a matter of justice for his mother and brother. It would be essential for protecting the integrity of the monarchy itself. William spent the rest of the evening studying the photographs from the hidden compartment, memorizing every detail of his brother's injuries in the crime scene. The evidence was compelling, but he realized that 10 years later, proving murder would be nearly impossible without additional corroborating information. The value of his mother's evidence lay not just in resolving the past, but in exposing ongoing crimes that might still be occurring. As midnight approached, William carefully returned all the items to the music box's hidden compartment and secured the mechanism. Tomorrow, he would begin the most dangerous phase of his investigation, getting close enough to Queen Camilla to access his mother's jewelry case while avoiding any action that might alert her to his growing suspicions. The stakes had escalated far beyond a stolen ring. If his mother's letter was accurate, William was now hunting the people who had murdered the previous crown prince and queen of Valdoria. And those same people were now closer to the throne than ever before, with Queen Camilla occupying the perfect position to monitor his every move and report back to her co-conspirators. William looked out at the palace grounds, so peaceful in the moonlight, and realized that he was likely surrounded by enemies who had spent 10 years believing their crimes were perfectly concealed. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of proving them wrong, even if it meant risking everything, his position, his safety, and possibly his life, in pursuit of justice for his family. William's opportunity to access his mother's jewelry case came sooner than expected, though not in the way he had hoped. King Edmund suffered a minor heart episode during a routine diplomatic meeting, requiring immediate hospitalization for observation and treatment. While the doctors assured the family that the king's condition was not life-threatening, the incident triggered the palace's emergency protocols and created exactly the kind of chaos that William needed to move freely through areas normally off-limits to him. Queen Camilla had rushed to the hospital immediately, leaving her private chambers unattended except for the standard security measures. With the entire palace staff focused on managing the crisis and coordinating with medical personnel, William found it relatively easy to slip into Camilla's study using his master key access as crown prince. The jewelry case sat exactly where he expected to find it, on a shelf in Camilla's walk-in closet among other personal mementos from his mother's collection. The black velvet case with silver clasps was exactly as his mother had described it, and when William opened it, he could see that the satin lining appeared to have been carefully restitched in one corner. Using a small knife from Camilla's desk, William carefully opened the stitching and found what his mother had hidden: a small brass key and a piece of paper with the bank's address and additional instructions written in Isabella's handwriting. The key was warm from being close to his mother's final secret for so many years, and William felt a profound sense of connection to her as he held it. But as he was preparing to leave, William heard voices in the corridor outside. Camilla had returned from the hospital earlier than expected, and she was speaking to someone in urgent, hushed tones. William quickly resealed the jewelry case and moved to the study area, grabbing a book from the shelf so he would appear to have been simply waiting for news about his father. "William!" Camilla exclaimed as she entered the room, surprise evident in her voice. "I didn't expect to find you here. How did you know I had returned?" "I didn't," William replied, setting down the book. "I came to wait for you because I wanted to ask about Father's condition without having to go through official channels." "How is he?" Camilla's expression softened with what appeared to be genuine concern. "The doctors say he's stabilized, but they want to keep him overnight for observation." "It seems to have been more of a stress episode than an actual heart attack, thank goodness." She paused, studying William's face. "You look pale, dear." "This has been frightening for all of us." William nodded, allowing his genuine worry about his father to show. "I've been thinking about how much responsibility will fall on my shoulders if Father's health continues to be an issue. There are so many aspects of royal governance that I'm still learning about." "Of course," Camilla agreed, moving to sit across from him. "Your father has been gradually increasing your duties, but perhaps we need to accelerate that process. There are financial matters in particular that you'll need to understand more thoroughly." The mention of financial matters sent a chill through William's blood, but he forced himself to appear merely interested rather than suspicious. "What kind of financial matters?" Camilla hesitated for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully. "The royal portfolio is more complex than most people realize. We have investments, charitable foundations, historical preservation funds, and various other financial instruments that require careful management. Some of these arrangements are, shall we say, traditional rather than conventional." "Traditional in what way?" "Well, for instance, some of our charitable work is conducted through private foundations that allow for more flexible funding arrangements, and some of our historical preservation efforts involve partnerships with private collectors who help us maintain artifacts that might otherwise be too expensive for the crown to preserve properly." William felt his stomach clench as he recognized the language his mother's letter had warned him about. Camilla was describing exactly the kinds of arrangements that Edward had discovered and that Isabella had investigated, but she was presenting them as legitimate financial strategies rather than the corruption they actually represented. "That sounds quite sophisticated," William said carefully. "I suppose I'll need to meet with our financial advisors to understand these arrangements better." "Actually," Camilla said, her tone becoming slightly more formal, "many of these matters are handled through a small group of trusted advisors who have been working with the royal family for many years. It might be more appropriate for you to be briefed by them rather than going through the general financial staff." "Of course." "Who would I be meeting with?" Camilla named several individuals, including Lord Pemberton, the royal treasurer, and Sir Marcus Blackwood, who served as the king's private financial advisor. William recognized both names from his mother's investigation notes. They had been among the people Isabella suspected of involvement in the conspiracy. "I'll arrange for you to meet with them next week," Camilla continued. "After your father has recovered and things have settled down a bit, they'll be able to explain everything you need to know about our more complex financial arrangements." William realized that he was being drawn into exactly the kind of meeting that his mother had warned him about. The conspirators wanted to bring him into their circle, probably to assess whether he could be trusted with their secrets or whether he posed a threat that needed to be managed. "Thank you," he said. "I appreciate your guidance during this difficult time." Camilla smiled, but William thought he detected something calculating in her expression. "Of course, dear. We're family, after all. We must look out for each other." That evening, while his father remained in the hospital under observation, William took a taxi to the Capital National Bank, using a false identification he had obtained years earlier for security purposes. The bank's safety deposit box area was accessible until 8 p.m., and William arrived with an hour to spare. The box, registered under Elizabeth Hartwell, contained everything his mother had promised and more. Edward's original financial documents showed a systematic pattern of funds being diverted from royal charities into private accounts controlled by a network of individuals connected to the palace. The amounts involved were staggering. Over the course of several years, millions of pounds had been stolen from organizations meant to support education, healthcare, and poverty relief. But the evidence went beyond simple embezzlement. Isabella's research had uncovered a complex scheme involving the sale of artifacts from the royal collection, with the proceeds being used to purchase private real estate and luxury goods for the conspirators. Some of the most historically significant pieces had been replaced with high-quality replicas, while the originals were sold to private collectors around the world. Most disturbing of all were the documents showing that several international aid organizations had been created as fronts for money laundering operations. Donations meant to provide relief for disaster victims and support for developing nations had instead been funneled into Swiss bank accounts and offshore investment funds. The scale and sophistication of the conspiracy was breathtaking. This wasn't simply a case of a few corrupt advisors stealing from the royal treasury. This was an organized criminal enterprise that had been using the monarchy's reputation and resources to conduct massive fraud operations for years. Among Isabella's notes, William found detailed profiles of everyone involved in the conspiracy. Queen Camilla's role was more central than even his mother had initially suspected. Camilla had not simply been brought in to monitor the royal family. She had been one of the architects of the entire scheme, using her position as queen to provide legitimacy and access to royal accounts and resources. The documents also revealed that Edward's death had been planned well in advance. The conspirators had learned that the crown prince was investigating their activities, and they had arranged his murder to look like a riding accident. Isabella's death had followed a similar pattern, staged as an automobile accident after she had gotten too close to exposing the truth. William sat in the small, windowless room at the bank, surrounded by evidence of crimes that had shaped his entire life, and felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. He was now the only person alive who knew the full scope of what had been done to his family and to the people of Valdoria who had trusted the monarchy to use their charitable donations responsibly. But he also realized that he was in extreme danger. If Camilla and her co-conspirators suspected that he had discovered their secrets, they would not hesitate to arrange a third accident to silence him permanently. The meeting she had proposed for the following week might be intended as much to assess his threat level as to bring him into their confidence. William carefully photographed every document in the safety deposit box using his phone, then returned the originals to their secure location. The evidence needed to be preserved somewhere beyond the reach of the conspirators, and he needed to develop a plan for exposing the truth without putting himself at fatal risk. As he walked back through the quiet city streets toward the palace, William's mind raced through possible strategies. He could go to the police, but several officers mentioned in his mother's notes suggested that the conspiracy had connections within law enforcement. He could try to involve international authorities, but that would require him to essentially accuse his own stepmother and several high-ranking royal advisors of murder and massive fraud. The most promising approach, William realized, might be to work with the media. A major newspaper or television investigation could expose the conspiracy while providing him with some protection through public attention. But media involvement would also mean the end of any possibility of resolving the matter quietly within the royal family. By the time William reached the palace, he had made his decision. The next morning, he would contact Catherine Sterling and ask for her help in developing a legal strategy for exposing the conspiracy. Her background in international law and her understanding of royal politics made her the perfect person to help him navigate the complex legal and diplomatic issues involved. But first, he would have to survive the meeting that Camilla had arranged. William would need to convince Lord Pemberton and Sir Marcus Blackwood that he was a naive and trusting heir who could be easily manipulated, while actually gathering additional evidence of their crimes. As he passed through the palace's security checkpoints and made his way to his private chambers, William reflected on how completely his life had changed in just a few weeks. He had begun this journey simply trying to understand how his mother's ring had ended up in his stepmother's possession. Now he was preparing to expose a criminal conspiracy that had murdered his mother and brother and stolen millions of pounds from charitable causes. The ring still sat in his safe, but its significance had evolved beyond mere sentiment or even evidence of grave robbery. It had become a symbol of his commitment to justice, a reminder that some secrets are too important to remain buried, and a promise to his mother's memory that her sacrificial investigation would finally yield the truth she had died trying to reveal. Tomorrow would bring new dangers and difficult choices, but tonight, for the first time since discovering his mother's ring, William felt the clarity that comes from knowing exactly what must be done. regardless of the personal cost. The conspiracy that had shaped his life was about to face the one thing its architects had never planned for: a son's love strong enough to risk everything in pursuit of justice. William's meeting with Lord Pemberton and Sir Marcus Blackwood was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in the palace's private conference room, an elegant space normally reserved for sensitive diplomatic discussions. As he prepared for what he knew would be the most dangerous conversation of his life, William wore a small recording device that Catherine had helped him obtain through her contacts in legal circles. Catherine had proven invaluable in the 3 days since William had shared his discoveries with her. Her legal mind had immediately grasped the implications of the evidence, and her connections in international law enforcement had provided William with options for safely exposing the conspiracy. Most importantly, she had helped him develop a strategy for the meeting that would allow him to gather additional evidence while appearing to be nothing more than an eager young heir ready to learn about his future responsibilities. King Edmund remained in the hospital for extended observation, though his condition had stabilized. The doctors were calling it a stress-induced cardiac episode rather than a true heart attack, but they wanted to keep him under medical supervision while they adjusted his medications and developed a long-term care plan. His absence from the palace created the perfect opportunity for the conspirators to begin William's education without royal oversight. Queen Camilla had briefed William that morning about what to expect from the meeting. Lord Pemberton and Sir Marcus will explain some of our more complex financial arrangements, she had said over breakfast. Some of these matters might seem unusual to you at first, but they represent decades of careful planning to maximize the Crown's resources while maintaining appropriate discretion. William had nodded enthusiastically, playing the role of an inexperienced prince eager to learn. I appreciate their willingness to share their expertise. Father has always spoken highly of their dedication to the crown. They are indeed dedicated, Camilla had agreed. They understand that sometimes the monarchy's best interests require approaches that might not be immediately obvious to outsiders. Now, as William entered the conference room, he found Lord Pemberton and Sir Marcus already seated at the polished oak table, surrounded by carefully organized financial documents. Both men stood respectfully as he entered, but William noticed something calculating in their expressions that reminded him of his mother's warnings about trusting no one in the inner circle. Lord Pemberton, a distinguished man in his early 60s, with silver hair and an expensive suit, gestured for William to take the seat at the head of the table. Your Highness, thank you for making time for this discussion. We know how busy you've been with your increased royal duties. Sir Marcus, slightly younger but equally well-dressed, opened a leather portfolio filled with financial statements and investment reports. We thought it would be helpful to give you an overview of some of the Crown's more sophisticated financial arrangements, particularly those that will require your direct involvement as you take on greater responsibility. For the next hour, the two men walked William through what they presented as innovative approaches to royal finance management. They described charitable foundations that operated with flexible overhead allowances, investment partnerships that provided enhanced returns through private arrangements, and historical preservation projects that involved creative asset management strategies. William listened with apparent fascination while recognizing every euphemism from his mother's investigation notes. These men were essentially confessing to years of systematic fraud while presenting it as legitimate financial innovation. The recording device captured every word as they described techniques for diverting charitable funds, selling royal artifacts through dummy corporations, and laundering money through fake international aid organizations. This is remarkably sophisticated, William said when they paused for questions. I had no idea that royal finances could be managed with such creativity. May I ask how long these arrangements have been in place? Lord Pemberton and Sir Marcus exchanged a meaningful look before Pemberton responded. Some of these strategies were developed during your mother's lifetime, though they've been significantly expanded since then. Your stepmother has been instrumental in helping us identify new opportunities. Queen Isabella was aware of these arrangements? William asked, working to keep his voice neutral despite the fury building inside him. To some extent, Sir Marcus replied carefully, though I'm afraid she didn't always appreciate the necessity of certain approaches. She had very traditional ideas about financial management that didn't always align with modern realities. William realized they were testing him, trying to gauge his reaction to veiled criticism of his mother. I see. And Queen Camilla has been more supportive of these innovations? Very much so, Pemberton confirmed. She understands that the monarchy must adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining its essential functions. Sometimes this requires approaches that might seem unconventional to those who don't understand the full complexity of our situation. As the meeting continued, William began to understand the true scope of the conspiracy. These men weren't just stealing money, they were systematically dismantling the financial integrity of the monarchy while using Queen Camilla's position to provide legitimacy for their crimes. They had turned the crown's charitable work into a money laundering operation and its historical preservation efforts into a high-end art theft scheme. Most chilling of all was their casual assumption that William would join their conspiracy without question. They clearly believed that greed or ambition would motivate him to participate in their crimes, just as they had apparently motivated Queen Camilla. "I'm curious," William said as the formal presentation concluded, "about the transition period when these new approaches were implemented. That must have required significant coordination." "Indeed," Sir Marcus agreed. "The period following Prince Edward's death and then Queen Isabella's passing required considerable restructuring, but Queen Camilla's arrival provided us with the leadership we needed to move forward effectively." William felt sick to his stomach as he realized they were talking about the murders of his mother and brother as business opportunities. These men had not only participated in the killings but had profited enormously from them. "Well, gentlemen," William said, standing to indicate the meeting's end, "this has been extremely educational. I look forward to learning more about these arrangements as I take on additional responsibilities." Lord Pemberton rose and extended his hand. "We're delighted by your enthusiasm, Your Highness. With your support, we can accomplish even more in the coming years." After the two men left, William remained in the conference room for several minutes, reviewing his notes and ensuring that the recording device had captured everything. The evidence was overwhelming, but he knew that moving against the conspirators would require careful coordination with law enforcement to prevent them from destroying evidence or fleeing the country. That afternoon, William met with Catherine and Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Thornton, whom Catherine had contacted through her legal network. DCI Thornton specialized in white-collar crime and had experience with high-profile cases involving public figures. More importantly, she had no previous connection to the royal household that might compromise her objectivity. "The evidence is substantial," DCI Thornton confirmed after reviewing William's documentation. "But prosecuting this case will be complicated by the involvement of senior royal family members. We'll need to coordinate with multiple agencies and potentially with international authorities, depending on where the stolen funds have been moved." William nodded, understanding the complexity of what lay ahead. "What about the safety concerns? If Queen Camilla and her associates suspect that I've discovered their crimes, we'll need to move quickly," DCI Thornton replied. "Once we begin executing search warrants and making arrests, your safety will be our top priority. But until then, you'll need to maintain your normal routine while avoiding any action that might alert them to the investigation." The arrests began 3 days later, coordinated simultaneously across multiple locations to prevent the destruction of evidence. Lord Pemberton was taken into custody at his London residence, while Sir Marcus was arrested at his office in the financial district. Search warrants were executed at a dozen locations, including several offshore accounts, and safety deposit boxes that had been identified in Isabella's research. Queen Camilla's arrest took place at the palace itself, in her private study, where William had first discovered his mother's ring. DCI Thornton personally executed the warrant, accompanied by a team of financial crime specialists who immediately began securing documents and computer files. William watched from his window as Camilla was led away in handcuffs, her expression a mixture of shock and calculation. Even facing arrest, she maintained the poised dignity that had made her so effective in her role as queen consort. William wondered if she was already planning her legal defense, or calculating which of her co-conspirators she might be willing to implicate in exchange for a reduced sentence. The palace erupted in controlled chaos as news of the arrests spread through the staff. King Edmund was informed at the hospital, where his condition immediately worsened upon learning that his wife had been arrested for murdering his first wife and son. The doctors placed him under sedation while they worked to stabilize his heart rhythm and blood pressure. Within hours, the story had broken in the international media. The headlines were sensational and devastating. Royal family rocked by murder and fraud charges. Queen Camilla arrested in palace conspiracy. Crown Prince exposes decade of royal crime. William held a press conference that evening, standing in the same room where his family had announced his engagement to the nation years earlier. Back when his life had seemed so much simpler, he spoke carefully from prepared remarks that Catherine and DCI Thornton had helped him craft. The evidence that has come to light reveals a conspiracy that betrayed not only my family but the people of Valdoria, who trusted the monarchy to use their charitable contributions responsibly, he said, looking directly into the cameras. My mother and brother died because they discovered this conspiracy and threatened to expose it. I am committed to ensuring that their sacrifice leads to justice and to reforms that will prevent such crimes from ever happening again. The questions from reporters were intense and personal, but William answered them with the same measured dignity that his mother had taught him to bring to all public appearances. He spoke about the pain of learning that his family had been betrayed by people they trusted, about his determination to restore integrity to the monarchy, and about his commitment to honoring his mother's memory by ensuring that her investigation finally achieved its intended purpose. In the weeks that followed, as the investigation expanded and additional arrests were made, William worked closely with Parliament and the Prime Minister to implement comprehensive reforms to royal financial oversight. New laws were passed requiring independent auditing of all royal charitable foundations, public disclosure of major royal investments, and parliamentary oversight of significant changes to royal financial arrangements. Queen Camilla and her co-conspirators were ultimately convicted on charges ranging from murder and conspiracy to fraud and money laundering. The trial revealed the full scope of their crimes, including detailed evidence about how they had arranged the deaths of Prince Edward and Queen Isabella and how they had used Camilla's position to legitimize years of systematic theft. Camilla herself was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a verdict that sent shockwaves through royal circles across Europe. The woman who had seemed to represent stability and continuity for the Valdorian monarchy had instead been revealed as its greatest threat. King Edmund recovered physically from his cardiac episode, but the emotional toll of learning about his wife's crimes accelerated his decision to abdicate in favor of William. The coronation took place on a crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 year after William had first discovered his mother's ring in Camilla's study. Catherine Sterling, who had become William's closest advisor and eventually his queen, stood beside him as he took the oath that made him King William V of Valdoria. In his coronation speech, he spoke about the importance of truth, justice, and the sacred trust between the monarchy and the people it served. The Valdorian blue, his mother's sapphire ring, was incorporated into the new crown jewels as a permanent reminder that even the most carefully concealed crimes will eventually be exposed by those who love justice more than they fear the consequences of pursuing it. Years later, King William would often tell his children about their grandmother, Queen Isabella, the woman who had loved them enough to risk her life ensuring that the truth would eventually come to light. He would explain how one person's courage and commitment to justice could change the course of history, and how the most important legacy anyone can leave is the knowledge that they stood up for what was right, regardless of the personal cost. The palace gardens, once Queen Camilla's pride, were transformed into a memorial garden dedicated to victims of crime who had been silenced before they could see justice. At its center stood a statue of Queen Isabella, holding a sapphire ring that caught the sunlight and threw brilliant blue reflections across the flowers that bloomed in eternal tribute to a mother's love and a son's determination to honor her sacrifice.